This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
What is something you're genuinely excited for?
I refuse to answer.
They will be selling 3,000 copies of the player's handbook at Gen Con.
I was so worried when I read this. I thought it was like, oh no.
Let me get in on some of that stamp action. You can't have all the stamps. And the UK were like, by golly, of course, here, have some of our stamps.
Hell, there are ways to make D12s that aren't a platonic solid.
I say we end the tyranny of the platonic solids.
Yes, who's with me?
The D10 is our wedge into that world.
We've already killed Pythagoras. Down with Plato as well.
You can find me, and possibly Shawn as well, and the other Ghostfire team at booth 1361.
All that and more right now.
Professional.
Did it in one.
Yeah. All right, 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. This is episode 146, I think. This is the 101st episode on our own YouTube channel from when we migrated from the Ghostfire gaming YouTube channel to Ghostfire podcasts. So if you're listening to us there, like, subscribe, you know you want to. My name's Ben Byrne, and I'm joined, as always, by Dael Kingsmill, James Hake, Shawn Merwin, and Shawn. I'm going to ask you, it feels like, look, not even from this podcast, because that's not fair. I was about to say a lot of kind of trepidation about the new 2024 D&D rules. What is something, it can be a small change, a specific thing, or it can be a large change, but what is something you're genuinely excited for in the new rules?
I refuse to answer until I have all 3 beautiful books in my hand, because I don't know. I have not seen the new rules except for the marketing bits that they've been dribbling out. But if they keep the exhaustion rules the same as they did for the playtest, I'm very excited for that change, because exhaustion then becomes something that is useful again, at least in my experience.
Gotcha. You're talking about the 1 point of exhaustion is 1 point of off a D20 roll?
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. I think that was a great playtest change that they made. James Hake, what about yourself?
I'm very eager to see the Bastion rules as they're translated into the core books. I love a good stronghold. My first ever fully homebrew D&D campaign had a stronghold in it. I have not used the MCDM rules. Back in 3rd edition when I ran that campaign, I vaguely used the Stronghold Builder's Guide and got quickly fed up with it and tired of its enormous gold costs and very granular system. So I hope that the 5th edition Bastion rules have something very sort of story-driven and flexible and campaign-appropriate, flexible to whatever kind of campaign you want to run, so long as your players have a home base. In fact, I like the concept so much, I wrote in Troll Skull Alley into Waterdeep Dragon Heist, so they had a home base within the city of Waterdeep. So if those Bastion rules can be used for Troll Skull, it was me. I love their rundown little poltergeist-infested bar and all their neighbors. Yeah,
I wanted so much more of Troll Skull Alley.
There was more. There was a whole character sheet. Didn't get in there. That's okay. Maybe with the Bastion rules, we'll be able to update that.
I agree with you. I have finally, for the first time probably in any of my campaigns. Actually, no, that's not true. But I do have a Bastion kind of ready to go for the party when we rejoin our campaign. So I am waiting for those rules with bated breath as well. Dael Kingsmill, what about yourself?
Okay, I don't know if this is a cop-out answer, but I really like the art layout. Like the places they have chosen to put art, the orientation of such art, the place it comes in relation to where the words are.
Sure.
I find scritches my brain in a very satisfying way. I like it.
Very small change that I am genuinely happy about. I think I've mentioned this before, but it's kind of for a funny reason. I like that they've made healing spells, specifically Cure Wounds and Healing Word, I believe, 2d8 or 2d4 at first level instead of 1d8 or 1d4 at first level. The reason I like that is because I think it balances better with the Grim Hollow long rest mechanics. So I don't know how it balances better with the core game, but I'm like, the way I like to run my games with those kind of extrapolated out rest rules, that's gonna make casting those spells a lot more worthwhile. And that's a sound. Speaking of the player's handbook for the new D&D 2024 rules, it will be at Gen Con. They will be selling 3,000 copies to 70,000 people. How's that going to work, you ask? Well, let me tell you. The Gen Con copies are slightly differentiated from the first print copies that will be coming in September, featuring a 50th anniversary logo in gold foil and a Gen Con 2024 book plate. I'll be honest with everyone, I had to Google book plate. I was like, what is it? Is it like a metal plate over the book? Is it the cover's
I love a
metal?
little book plate.
What is a book plate, Ben?
I believe, and maybe correct me, Dael or Shawn, if I'm wrong, but it's like an extra page on the inside of the book that's kind of almost like a second cover when you open it up.
I guess it could be. I've always referred to book plates as being like that little thing that you put in at the front that says, this book belongs to...
That it's not a whole page. It goes onto the front page or the interior page to denote ownership or special edition or something of that nature.
Well, if you want to get your hands on one, they've got a very specific system for how this is going to work. Sales will occur only on Thursday between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. and Friday, Saturday, Sunday between 9 a.m. and 12 p.m. at the show. The dates are the Gen Con dates. But you can't just walk up and purchase. At 7 a.m. on each sales day, tickets, I assume, for that day will be up for purchase. Tickets are free, listed on the Gen Con event ticketing system. And if you're a Gen Con attendee, you can claim a ticket for admission for an opportunity to go and purchase one of the books. You have to have a ticket. You can't walk up and try to purchase without one.
That's the smartest choice they made. I was so worried when I read this headline. I was like, oh no. They plan to sell it across 3 days. It's not going to happen. They will all be gone. But
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to assume they're probably allotted 1,000 copies a day. Oh, no, there's 4 days that they're selling them. It's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
They're doing it Thursday too, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. Different time slot on Thursday. It's in the afternoon, but to evening.
As is the entire con.
Yes. Is it?
It's a little convention joke because often the Thursday is a half day of the con because as people arrive early and they get their badges, but the actual convention hasn't really gotten into full swing yet.
How do you?
It was a little convention reference there.
Just
for
a bit
you.
of convention humor for you folks.
How do you feel about 4-day conventions, Dael? Because in Australia, at least in the ones I've been to, we tend to do 3 days at most: Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah, I tend to show up on the Friday, even if there's a Thursday. I tend to show up on the Friday.
Let me interject, though. I love a 4-day convention as long as the 4th day is a Monday. PAX West switched to
PAX
Friday,
West.
Saturday, Sunday, Monday several years ago. And Monday, my favorite day of the con. Everyone's very tired. They're all partied out. The vendors are all packing up. It is a super chill day. And you can just go around without having to fight for your life through the crowds. This is why I'm not going to be a Gen Con, folks.
Bargains as everyone is trying to sell off the last of their stock so they don't have to transport it back home.
Listen, I'd love to go to Gen Con, but that whole, I get so agoraphobic in there. It's way too much for me.
Yeah, it is going to be. I remember last year you had to plan to, and I'm sure it was like this in many other years as well. You had to basically, like, if we had to go to the Ghostfire booth, and we had to be there by like 5:30, you had to allot like at least an extra 15 minutes from showing up to the convention, like the front doors of the building, to getting to the booth, just to walk through the crowd to be able to get over there, because you have to go slowly.
I didn't feel like it was that hard.
All right, fair enough.
Maybe I'm just lithe and agile.
Or maybe you just show up late everywhere.
Maybe I do just show up late everywhere.
People were late to the first dinner that we had, I know.
There you go. There you go.
Well, you were late too, Ben, so glad
was I? Yeah, I think we were. Yeah, okay. That's true. Now, all right,
Stop
it's all coming back to me.
Shawn.
It's flooding back to me now. I do remember. You were upstairs. We couldn't find you. Just worth mentioning one final thing, just so the scalpers aren't, sharpening their scalping knives. It is one purchase per ticket per day, which makes me wonder if you could purchase like 3 tickets each day and go in and get 3 copies on separate days. But you cannot like go in and be like 5 players handbooks for me. Thank you. You need to purchase a ticket to be able to do so, and it will be probably assigned to your badge. Be cool. That's all I'm going to say on the topic. Lots of people, lots of fans want to get in. Speaking of things happening at Gen Con, as mentioned, I think, Shawn, you hinted at this last week, the United States Postal Service was like, hey, UK. Sorry, hey, UK. Let me get in on some of that stamp action. You can't have all the stamps. And the UK were like, by golly, of course, here, have some of our stamps. And the US were like, you know what? We don't want any of your stamps. We're going to make our own D&D stamps. And that's what they've done, because there will be official D&D stamps sold at Gen Con, which are different from the UK ones. Let that float around in your noggin for a moment.
And they will be on sale in the same area that the D&D books are. And they're going to have an opening ceremony, if you will, where the U.S. Postal Service representative will be there to ceremonially open the gates to sales with Jeremy Crawford and
Chris Perkins?
Chris Perkins, thank you. Chris will be there to sign things and to also help with the
Good old
unveiling.
CPERC.
Is a signed sheet of stamps worth more or less? Like, can you send mail with signed stamps?
It's a good question. I would say, hey, J-Croc, give me my 50 cents back. You ruined my stamps.
There's a line through this stamp. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can send mail with this. Yeah, I mean, I found it interesting. So the art is not, I don't have the artist's name in front of me, so I'm going to forget. But the UK was they were bespoke stamps drawn for the UK Royal Mail. I believe the USPS ones, yes. I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
The US ones are kind of drawing more from, I suppose, the history of D&D, the 50 years of D&D, drawing artwork from various different places for their stampiness. So if you want those, go Gen Con. I believe, maybe you can correct me on this, Shawn, I believe you can also pre-order these on a USPS website as well. I don't think you have to be at Gen Con to be able to get them.
I would say that's probably the case.
And then speaking of other things that are happening at Gen Con that are D&D related, Wizards of the Coast are at Gen Con. They're throwing a butt ton of events. If you are there for D&D, you are going to be well served. But I'm not going to run through them all. But you can go onto EN World, have a pretty comprehensive list of all the events that Wizards are running there. But narrowing back down, Friday 1 p.m, room 232 is a D&D Beyond Partner Spotlight, which is being moderated by Latia Jackie with Ghostfire Gaming, Hit Point Press, and Kobold Press all appearing on that panel to talk third parties on D&D Beyond. I think that's fun. I think that's exciting. Not least of all because I'll be there. But yeah.
Will you be on the panel, Ben?
I believe so. Let's say yes.
That's not the response I was expecting.
I will be in the room in any circumstance.
I do. If not you, who?
It
will almost certainly be me.
Okay. All right. He's keeping his options open, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I might have just want to make sure there's room, in there. But if I'm not there, you can find me and possibly Shawn as well, and the other Ghostfire team at booth 1361. On the main show floor. We will be there on the Thursday, bright and early from the beginning of the convention, and then packing up on Sunday. 1361 is the booth number. We've got adventures. We've got an epic. I talked about some of this last week. We've got the Ghostfire Gaming RPG publication design panel, 11 a.m. on the Thursday with Shawn, myself, Joe Rasso from the studio team will be there. So if you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you want to learn about how Ghostfire's method for sort of producing our books, come hang out. Breaking news, Wizards of the Coast have appointed a new president to take the place of Cynthia Williams. John Haidt, I'm assuming is how you pronounce that, 12-year Blizzard Entertainment executive who served as Senior Vice President and General Manager of the Warcraft franchise, will be overseeing strategy at Magic the Gathering and D&D, in addition to overseeing Hasbro's network of gaming studios and digital licensing, which is interesting. They've started to, Shawn, correct me if your understanding is different. I feel like you might have an understanding, but it feels like Hasbro are kind of starting to group their gaming all together. It's not all necessarily under Wizards, but it's all kind of, their gaming studios and everything. They're kind of, Wizards of the Coast responsibility seems to be branching broader than the tabletop.
It is, but it's hard to say because they have so many partnerships, but then they own this company, but yet it's in a different location and it has its own staff. It is tough. And then I was surprised when I saw that part of John Haidt's responsibilities would be these third-party connected game companies. Like that's a lot. I have more to add, but I'm going to let you talk.
Maybe I'll just quickly wrap this out and then we can dive into it because I have more questions for you, to be honest. Haidt's appointment, quote, marks a significant step in Hasbro's strategic focus on digital experiences and video games. There's an interesting difference between Hite and Cynthia Williams. Cynthia, we know, came from Xbox, I believe, previous to her employment with Wizards of the Coast. So they keep looking at the video game industry for their talent when it comes to executive management roles. The difference being Hite led apparently development on several World of Warcraft expansions, Diablo 3 Reaper of Souls, pardon me. So has more kind of actual hands-on development experience with games, is my understanding, as opposed to Williams, who worked more in sales and kind of that side of things. So, take that for what you will. My question kind of, all that context given, knocking it back to you, Shawn, where does Dan Rawson fit in all of this? Because before the announcement of John coming in, I was kind of like, so Dan's in charge of everything now?
It is odd, and Teos and I were trying to pull the threads out on this. We know that Dan Rawson's role was expanded to include the Hasbro Pulse offerings. And so we were wondering, a new executive named Jess Lanzillo, I think, was brought on as vice president for D&D. When Kyle Brink left, we're like, okay, so she's stepping in and taking Kyle's place, but Kyle wasn't a VP. He was just like the director of D&D. But then Dan moved. And so we're trying to figure out who is responsible for what. And then just middle of last week, a new position was put up on the job position listing for product architect for Dungeons and Dragons. And the requirements or the job description was basically everything that it sounds like a D&D president should be. It was making sure the rules work for all different aspects of gaming. So digital, tabletop, partnerships, innovating our playable content on digital platforms, top of funnel new player experiences, working with partners, both partners that license D&D or partnerships that Wizards is creating something for. So, think like Lord of the Rings, magic cards, that sort of thing.
Right.
So all of this product architect sounded like a higher level executive, but working with rules. And so we're not sure if Jess Lanzillo, I hope I'm getting that last name right, is coming on as a vice president, but she's going to handle more of the brand marketing, that side of the ledger, whereas this new product architect is going to come in and handle melding all of the different media to make sure that the rules work in all of those cases, which would sort of mimic what Dan and Kyle were doing. So if Dan is still there, great. If he's not, this product architect plus Jess seem to have filled in those two roles, maybe with some shifting responsibilities, but a pretty solid foundation for everything that the two previous people were doing.
I believe Dan Rawson's, this is what kind of confused me a little bit. Correct me if I'm wrong, because he got a promotion or he got a side motion. He got kind of given more responsibility, I believe, 2 weeks ago. It was announced as part of two new hires plus Dan kind of slightly moving position. And part of that, I believe, was he was like head of play or something like that, or like head of organized play. But not, when I say that, I don't mean Adventurers League. Like,
I read what they said Dan was what he had been moved toward. And again, they said expanded role, not different role.
Yes.
But that expanded role is completely different. Right? Hasbro Pulse has nothing to do with D&D, with magic, that sort of thing. So
he expanded right into the other room.
Right. And so that's why when the president's announcement came, I was like, okay, that makes sense. Jess's vice president role makes sense, but there's still a missing piece in there. There's still something, and that product architect coming in sort of, for me, makes total sense that even if Dan is still in the hierarchy for D&D, these other two people are sort of taking on a lot of the responsibilities that he would have that might then allow him to do this other thing and not lose a step in terms of the hierarchy for the D&D side. And I could be completely wrong. But that sort of makes sense in the whole hierarchy of what has been at Wizards and what they need at Wizards. They need this product architect badly. They need someone to come in and make sure everything that they're doing meshes with partners, with Tabletop, with 3D Tabletop, with D&D Beyond, with the core game. And that's what the responsibilities for the job really highlight.
Yeah, and Roman in chat is correct. If you want more details, just wait until we've finished recording and it'll probably release
Inevitably.
sometime tomorrow.
I'm glad it's not just me in terms of like, what? Because sometimes the Lorecast run sheet takes me a while to put it together. It feels like it should be quick. It's like, okay, find this article, put this in, but sometimes it takes longer because it's like wrapping your head around like, what happened? Wait, who did what? Where's who moving? That's your industry news for today. Speaking of industry news, Dael Kingsmill, do you know what Rollgate is?
Rollgate?
Rollgate.
This is going to be one of those like controversies where they check the word gate at the end of it, isn't it?
No, it was really not.
I'm so thrilled. Please do tell me what Rollgate is.
Okay. James Haig, do you know what Tabletop Mirror is?
I've never heard of it in my life.
No, me too. So Rollgate purchased Tabletop Mirror.
Isn't that a toothpaste?
Yes.
My understanding of this, I had to do not digging, but I had to kind of wrap my head around this. So Rollgate is a play-by-post or play-by-chat tabletop RPG app where folks what they seem to market themselves on is if you don't have time to play a game or you can't commit, 2-3 hours, 3-4 hours to sitting down, play just one message a day or, send a couple messages and play-by-post through Rollgate. Tabletop Mirror, on the other hand, is an online tabletop RPG platform that enables you, what it seems to majoritively be doing is kind of design and play your own tabletop RPG using their digital tools to kind of set yourself up. I don't know exactly what that looks like, to be fair. I believe they also say you can do it, you can use an established system like 5e or whatever you want, but Tabletop Mirror makes it easier to organize your own homebrews and ensure that they kind of continue to enter into the game in the way that you want them to. Two, relatively small kind of in the digital space of tabletop industry companies that are coming together and by their powers combined, they'll be able to do both those things, I assume. Cool.
Okay.
Good on them.
It's interesting.
I don't understand how it works, but cool.
This is the sort of thing that I think is really great for tabletop games, but has a real hard road ahead of it selling itself to people. Tabletop games is the best when they have all of this flexibility and customizability and just open creativity. Anything that supports that is fantastic. But you can't really convince someone to buy something that can do anything because you really got to convince them it can do anything well. And hey, I have not heard anyone talking about this. It would be cool if someone started showing a lot of videos, if the hype started reaching my feed. But once it won't be until I see it in action, doing cool stuff that I wanted to do and doing it well, that I'll really start caring about a big new venture like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. Part of the reason I threw this on the run sheet is because Tabletop Mirror I have seen around, and you might recognize their logo. It kind of looks like a D20, but like offset, like fractured, like split down the middle and kind of slid a bit. I've seen their logo around for sure, and that's kind of what caught my attention about this. But like, if I'm coming off as a bit sardonic, I don't necessarily intend to. It's just because I'm nervous about getting the facts right.
And Australian.
But if either of these things sound cool, like go check them out. They're smaller kind of digital companies in the space trying to do a cool thing, coming together to do that cool thing. Check them out if it sounds cool.
The part that I'm confused because I am abreast of the play-by-post situation. I think that's a great sell. I think that's fairly easy to sell. I think a lot of people who enjoy tabletop RPGs would enjoy that type of play.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to understand exactly how this sort of put your homebrew together from modular bits that pre-exist. That's the part that I'm trying to understand how that works. Because it sounds cool, but I also don't quite, it's not taking a shape in my brain.
Well, do you remember, and these things were, they still exist for the record, but like I remember them from the early 2000s, late 90s, and it was kind of like a build your own RPG, like video game RPG, build your own Skyrim, except Skyrim wasn't around. And they were just like little pixel art things where you would start to build a town by dropping in square pixel art bricks to make a building. And then you could you wouldn't have to do any programming yourself because the intention was that this game made it easy for you. It was kind of like The Sims or like Little Big Planet actually is a way better analogy. It was kind of like Little Big Planet where you're creating your own levels, but the idea was you create your own RPG using the tools of that video game. And they were super simple, and it seemed odd to me at the time because I'm like, how can you do this without programming? Aren't you limited by the programming of the toolkit that you're using? Well, yes, but your imagination and the tools that are provided might still enable you to create something fairly bespoke. So my imagining is something like, let's say you wanted to create a system that was on a D12 or 2D12, I'm just pulling dice out of nowhere. You can select, all right, 2D12, put these in, they roll together, they need to hit this number for it to be, or add this number to it as when these dice are rolled. Does that make sense? Like you can give the system simple commands.
It makes way more sense to me now. I'm a little bit sold on it. I'm not going to lie to you.
Sure, yeah. And for the record, I haven't used Tabletop Mirror. I don't know if that is exactly how it works, but that's kind of how I'm imagining it working, of you just putting in simple commands to tell it to do certain things within the limitations of like, D6, D12, D8, whatever it is. I don't imagine you can like make up dice, though maybe you can. Because it's digital. It's like, give me a D5. I don't know, whatever. Cool. So there's
I want my
D5.
I want those non-Euclidean dice.
Like?
It looks like a D10, but with half the numbers.
That's a pretty decent way of making a D5. I can't argue with that.
Yeah, that's not satisfying. Putting a D10, but putting 2 5s on like double the numbers on each face.
No. Don't do no double the numbers. Make one end so round that it can't sit on it. It has to choose a side.
There are absolutely D5s out there. There are plenty. Hell, there are ways to make D12s that aren't a platonic solid, right? We can combine all sorts of weird shapes in order to make a 3D
I say
prism.
we end the tyranny of the platonic solids.
Yes, who's with me?
The D10 is our wedge into that world.
We've already killed Pythagoras. Down with Plato as well.
Your philosophy joke for today. Speaking of philosophy, we shall philosophize for much of the rest of this podcast through the emails that have been sent to us. James, what's our email address?
Well, Ben, of course, it's podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
Our first time. Excellent. First email, this is a quick one just coming in from a Turtlon, judging by the email address, asking if we're going to San Diego Comic-Con, which I believe is this weekend coming.
I'm so sad to be missing it this year. I've got mad FOMO already. But a good friend, Omar Najam, is going to be doing, I think he's got like 3 or 4 different panels, so you could look him up. He's been on the podcast a couple times in my stead, which I appreciate.
What's San Diego like for folks that haven't gone before? It's got a really big reputation, especially if you're in kind of the movie, TV show, video game nerdosphere. What's it like going to that convention?
I really enjoy it. It's got kind of the most pure convention energy for me. It's for like the real like trad nerds. There are probably cons that have like a more genuine kind of reputation or whatever. But as a big TV and film nerd, that's the convention that really feels like everything pops in color. And I don't know, it's kind of a fun city to wander around during Comic-Con as well. I don't know. I just have had a good time every time I've gone.
Yeah, maybe next year. Unfortunately,
good
not
food.
This year. But we shall hope to catch you there at some point in the future, Turtlon. I'd love to go to, I've never been to a convention outside of needing to for work, to be completely honest with you. I don't think I've ever paid to go to a convention. Is that bad? Does that make me sound like a jerk? I'm not sure.
Yosemite Mike is also correct. The San Diego Zoo is really good. It's unconnected with the convention, but true.
But yeah, I'd like to go to more conventions. Maybe San Diego's up there. Adepticon is up there on my list of conventions to attend for myself. Anyway, Eric's question. Eric emailing podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. This was a good question. Favorite character flaws. What are some character flaws that you've played, thinking of the personal bonds, personality traits, bonds, flaws, etc., what are some of your favorite flaws that you've either played or had played at your table?
The first game that comes to mind was not actually D&D. It was a game of World of Darkness that I played with Adam Carnivale, another friend of the podcast, was running it for Jackson Bailey and I. And it was the most fun I've maybe ever had. I think it's up live on their Podcast Plus thing now already, but it'll be coming to Spotify relatively soon. But it was just this game where there had been some kind of a huge drug bust, and so we got pulled in by the cartel to do drug trafficking for them in the 80s. And it was very strange. It was a really weird time. There were evil crabs, but the flaws of the characters are what made it just so funny to me because, of course, World of Darkness, you have to have kind of character flaws that you use to regenerate certain sort of tools that you use to play the game. And Jackson's character had deviousness and my character had greed, but we just kept playing into it and using it as a decision-making device. And so it was just every now and then it would be like, okay, but what if I secretly stash some extra cocaine that's just for me in this section of the plane that's hidden, and then the other character would find out. It was just this back and forth the whole way through, and it genuinely is some of the most fun I've ever had at a tabletop RPG table. And I think that for me is the key. If you're looking for a good character flaw, something that is actionable is really handy. I don't know. You do also have to vibe out with the table, because if you're going to continuously play into a character flaw that's going to screw everyone else over, maybe it's not going to go down so well. But something that's actionable that you can kind of use as a decision-making tool can be really, really fun. Yeah.
I just created a character flaw for a Daggerheart playtest game that I'm running. I'm running this sort of mushroom person knight. And the whole vibe for his character is very sort of Castlevania, Lords of Darkness, Lords of Shadow. And so he's this very sort of, they're this very sort of grim character, and yet their flaw is that they believe that their emotions are a source of weakness because they feel extremely deeply, as opposed to the rest of their fungal bloom, who feels sort of very shallowly, right? They're more on a fungal emotional level. Whereas meanwhile, this character, they just everything that happens around them is deeply, deeply affecting. And so it's a bit broader than straight up greed, but it means that I get to have these enormous reactions to everything. And if I don't want to throw the sort of vibe at the table off completely by leaping into a combat or having this very reactive sense, then I can be like, okay, well, I'm going to hold it back. I'm going to shove everything down to build up towards the next sort of emotional explosion. And it's nice to have a character like that in any sort of RPG, because I feel like we get kind of locked down in thinking and decision making and planning and strategizing. And sometimes you just need someone to go completely overboard to kick things off. And usually that's a barbarian, but I like having this very reserved character who every now and then very, motivatedly goes off the rails.
I love playing characters that are not too bright. for exactly that reason. Because A, it's closest to me in real life. It's easy to role play. 2, you can have some role playing fun with it. But 3, instigators are the best players.
Sure.
Because exactly as James said, when everyone is thinking too much and everyone's scared to act, and the DM is just waiting to tell you this great story, they're waiting to tell you what happens when you pull the lever, because it's going to be amazing. You need somebody to go pull the lever. And so I love to play the character that is, this will solve all our problems, and just start cranking on the lever. Absolutely perfect flaw. But I love that the backgrounds for 5e included these things and flaws. Some of my favorite things to do with my class, or if I'm working with other designers, is to see what flaws they put in. Because you can really tell someone understands role-playing and understands the game when the flaw is not, I'm greedy.
Sure.
But when there is more to it, when there is a story to it that the player can draw from. I made one for the Acquisitions Incorporated book called The Celebrity Adventurer Scion. That was a background. So your parent was a famous adventurer. And so your flaws all have to do with that. And one of them is, oh yeah, that spell you just cast? Yeah, that's named after my parent's best friend. Let me tell you about him or her. Right. And it's that sort of thing that just, it tells the player, this is the character you're signing up for. Go to town.
Yeah.
It's so real as well. Like there is that, guidance in the 5e book where it's talking about bonds, ideals, and flaws. And it sort of says, make them specific.
Mhm.
Don't just say I'm greedy. Say something specific. I can't help myself when something is shiny. I don't know. You make it more specific, right? And it kind of makes me think of, I had a great D&D character I played whose thing was just seize the moment because tomorrow you might be dead. And the whole point was just going Nova, even if you know that you're going to have 5 encounters that day. Use everything you have in the first encounter because you might not get to use it later. And that can be, they're little extra things that just tell you something about the character. You're so right.
They're an interesting addition to 5th edition, the whole thing. I want to keep the conversation kind of couched in flaws because I think that's an interesting thing to talk about specifically. But in terms of those 4 boxes, I remember when I was introducing people to the game when we do pub events and things like that, the first thing, or not the first thing, but one of the things I would say when I'm introducing folks to the character sheet is like, look at the, strength, dexterity stuff over here. These are kind of the numbers you're going to be most concerned about. Maybe I'd introduce them to their proficiencies, but I kind of wouldn't bother going through the whole sheet because you don't want to overwhelm people.
Mhm.
But then I would point to those 4 boxes and just be like, have a read of these. They tell you about your character. They have absolutely no rules implication whatsoever. So you don't have to worry about like that affecting your character, but it might help you kind of get a feel for who they are. And you can change them if you want because they, if you're an experienced role player who doesn't like these, you can change them up. So because there's not like a mechanical leverage against them in 5e, there's no... I think they talked about inspiration in the 2014 rules was meant to be predicated on people, role-playing those specific things from their character sheet. But unless the GM has perfect memory for 6 times 4 of what those traits are, you're not going to remember to know exactly when a player is necessarily utilizing those without that mechanical leverage there. So I always forgot. So there is a bit of an art form to it because... the one that I really don't like, Dael, I think you already shouted out, or maybe it was Shawn, sorry, who said like greed just on its own face can be, and greed's just an example, but like anytime a simple flaw gets played to the hilt to the point that it starts to become a real pain point for the rest of the party because you're trying to accomplish a thing and then this one player keeps kind of sneaking off and like doing their own thing and almost playing their own game, that kind of starts to grate a little bit.
Yeah.
But if it's played in a clever way or a way that plays into the story, and that is where it becomes a little bit more of an art form, a little bit of a thing that, the dice can't necessarily help you with, that's when those things become really rich and really, really interesting and really engaging.
By the way, that character that I was talking about that I played, whose thing was simply greed, the game is called Beyond the Map, Transport and Acquisitions. I just looked it up so that people can look it up. There you go.
And I think that greed, to talk about that example a little bit further, to give some examples in one of the games that I played, I think that can be a great trait. I don't think that trait inherently is like, don't choose greed because it's a terrible trait, but it's just kind of like finding a bit more of an active way or a nuanced way to kind of approach it. We had a character that has recurred in a couple of the campaigns we've run with my group. The character's name is Snick Chop, which is a play on Bricktop from Snatch, the Guy Ritchie movie. And Snick Chop kind of became this... they're a half-orc rogue. They're played by one specific player at the table. They've shown up in a couple of campaigns and they've become notorious because they're this absolutely chaotic character who is completely self-centered and will help the party, but their flaw isn't so much greed as it is Sneak Chop never passes up an opportunity to advantage themselves or something like that. So Sneak Chop's going to betray the party, but you never know when it's going to come. And Sneak Chop can be quite helpful for like a lot of the campaign, because if it's in Sneak Chop's best interest to help the party, they'll be very helpful. And so it became this beloved character despite how annoying they could be in campaigns, because it was like, oh man, when Sneak Chop helps you, it's awesome. But then when the flip happens, it's never just like, well, screw you guys, ha ha ha. Sneak Chop always gets themselves in worse trouble by, betraying, or gets the party in deep trouble by betraying them. And so it creates these really interesting role play moments, as opposed to just this repeated action that keeps happening, every other session or every other turn, if that makes sense.
Sometimes I wonder if, you know how we all sort of go through that phase as a new player and then learn to hate when new players do this, where you're just indulging every terrible impulse that you have. And it's like, yeah, I'm going to shake down this shopkeeper, and I'm going to interrogate this guy and cut off his ear. Like all these things that you get sick of at some point and go, okay, it's starting to be annoying. I wonder whether character flaws are the place where, as you develop as a player, you start to go, all right, I can indulge one of my bad player impulses. Which one am I going to indulge? That could be a way of choosing.
And let me say this. There's been kind of a conversation in chat for the past little bit about how greed can be a dangerous flaw, right? All of these flaws are potentially dangerous because they create conflict between player characters, right? And people who are not prepared for conflict between player characters will often let that bleed into conflict between players. Honestly, even for people who are prepared for conflict between their characters, can let it bleed into conflict between each other, especially for flaws that impact the smooth flow of the game. And I can tell that Dael and her fellow players, you guys had a great level of communication, because a flaw as incendiary as greed not wreck your game. You were able to deal with each other in the right way, so that flaw went off without a hitch. And the best way to make that happen is basically this is what I did with my character, who I basically let everyone know from the beginning, hey, this character is going to have some pretty wildly outsized emotional reactions to things, because they are an expert at repressing, and sometimes that just explodes. And so everyone knew that going in, and we talked about our characters' various flaws, and we kind of, because we're all a sort of veteran RPG players and veteran storytellers, we started getting ideas of how to poke each other's buttons to create conflict that is not generated by our GM at all. These characters will just kind of create friction and create sparks that will let the GM create some situations, and then we will get ourselves into trouble based on that. And done well, that's the best TV series, all the best TV series you've ever seen, right? It's all internal conflict, external circumstances, plot. Very rarely do you see stuff where it's all people working in perfect synergy, gears are turning excellently, and it's all external conflict. That's sort of pulp adventure. That's sort of Conan and Tarzan and stuff like that. It's classic D&D adventures, which is, why it works so well. Players don't have to worry about each other's flaws and foibles nearly as well when it's kill the leader of the snake god cult.
That's why running a one-shot where you provide pre-gens for the players, flaws and those things can be perfect, because you can match them. You can have the one character whose flaw is, you really are infatuated with blank. Elves, with people that have tattoos, with something. And then you give another character tattoos and the flaw of, you do not like to be scrutinized. Right. And you are inviting the fun of roleplay. Now, if one person wants to back off from it, that's fine. They can do so. But you're giving them the grist for that role-playing mill without having to have a discussion ahead of time.
unless these are all good friends, you've all played together for a very long time, that they can play ball like this. If you're doing a convention game like this with total strangers, make sure they know that this is what they're getting into, because for many people, this is kind of beyond the bounds of normal RPG play, because it's outside of that sort of pulpy, get the bad guy stuff. Some people love discovering this at the table, right? You've been playing with them for 15 years and all of a sudden, oh, I hate that guy. Oh, I hate that guy. We need to work together. Boom, zap, sparks, conflict.
I think at a convention, you definitely want to, using Shawn's example as the example, test the waters a little bit. If you're the infatuated with tattoos guy and the tattoos character, the player's kind of like, can you not stop talking to me, but like, can we like get on with the quest rather than you continuing to talk at me? Kind of be open to backing off that a little bit. There's heaps of fun to be had there, but just kind of testing the waters, seeing how game the other player is, and then gauging like, okay, is the scene starting to stagnate because I won't let this go? Am I just a dog with a bone at this point? And do we need to move the scene forward? Trying to be a little bit aware of that. I think for campaign play, having that session zero talk and talking about your flaws and other personality traits for that matter and how they might interlink. We've talked a little bit on this podcast before about, using a fiasco-style relationship web at the start of a campaign to establish relationships in the party. I don't know if we've ever talked about whether the ideas come up of, in 5th edition specifically, using these 4 boxes to create that relationship web. So it's something that gets written on your character sheet and kind of has a place rather than sort of extraneous data that you need to always be juggling in your mind about your character.
Be the player who's willing to also be, impacted by flaws. If you're going to come to the table and make things harder on the other players by playing into your character flaws, you also have to be willing to kind of suffer the consequences of your flaw and other people's flaws. And I think that it goes a long way, particularly in these like one-shot style games where it's like, you've only got so much time. I think it goes a long way to kind of show that tit for tat and be like, look, I am also willing to suffer the slings and arrows of my own terrible choices.
Yeah. I think kind of what I was going to go on to, which bounces off of that as well, is that flaws don't have to be this terrible thing or this like thing that kind of crunches your character to a halt every time. Like it doesn't have to be almost like a tick. I think a lot of players play their character flaws like it's almost like an irresistible force upon their character that must be, every time X happens, Y must be the result. They can be something that's a little less vicious, I suppose. I'll give you an example. In a campaign that I played, there was a character who was a fighter. He was a half-orc. I don't think his character was particularly intelligent, but this was the kind of like gentle giant kind of archetype, kind of a Doberman. I don't know if this is what the player had written on their character sheet. The character was called Kaz, but they would just basically like, they would do things that might annoy the other party members. Kaz, stay here and make sure nobody comes in the door. All right. And then they'd be like later, Kaz, come on, it's time to go. And he's like, but you told me to watch the door. No, come on, we've got to go now. Okay. And the flaw seemed to be not necessarily that they were, unintelligent, but that they would just do whatever their friends asked them to do because they wanted the best for their friends. It's kind of like that scene from Community where Abed stays in Annie's experiment about don't leave the room. Why didn't you leave? Because you asked me not to and we're friends, Kaz, I need help. Okay, I will help you, as long as you need it in every way that you need it. But it can sometimes then become a bit of a burden because Kaz doesn't think for themselves super often, you know what I mean? That's my recollection of that character anyway. Maybe the player recalls it a bit differently, but that's an example, I think, of a flaw that's not a nervous tick that just triggers every so often,
Yeah. And it's also, the fun thing about flaws narratively, if we're watching a TV show, if we're watching a movie, the fun thing about a character flaw is watching a character overcome them sometimes, It doesn't have to be a permanent fixture as well. It's just kind of a fun little guideline to get you into role playing. So, I don't know. Don't overthink it.
And one more thing on flaws, if you do want to overthink it, the best character flaws, sorry, Dael, the best character flaws are the same as your character's strengths. You get tropey, disjointed characters by, creating a little laundry list of flaws like, I talk to animals and people think I'm weird, right? Those are sort of flaws that people who say tropey characters are based off of. Really meaty characters do the thing that like makes them a good person too much, or they're an offshoot byproduct of them doing what they think is best. I'm trying to think of a good example right now, but I'm coming up with a blank. I'm at the end of a podcast.
Yeah, the only examples I'm thinking of are people I know in real life, and I will spare them on this day.
Well, okay. Well, let's take a very broad example. If you're in a film noir and you're a hard-boiled detective, then you are going to get yourself into trouble constantly because your best trait is the fact that you never give up, right? You are undeterrable in your quest for justice and knowledge, and that will get you in over your head over and over and over again, and it will not only cause you trouble, it will cause the people who you love trouble. It will get people killed, it will get you wounded, but it is the thing that you must stick to in order to get what you want.
I love this advice because in all my play-by-post roleplay days, there's always a section in the character submission for flaws. And man, I got so many instant acceptances just based on having a character flaw that was like taking an attribute and pushing it to such an extreme that it became a detriment. It's a life hack.
It reminds me of, we're watching, my wife and I have been watching Smallville, of all shows, Blast from the Past. We're into season 8. Yeah, we've never skipped an intro. That's our rule. We never skip intro, even though we're on a streaming platform. The thing that you notice about these characters, and part of me wonders how deliberate this is and or not deliberate, because the show seemed to have a couple of PSAs back in the day. They had like a hardcore like anti sex before marriage episode that was kind of weird, and it was kind of like, is this the morality this show should be? All right, like whatever, I guess back in 2000 and whatever, Clark as a character, and I think this is very indicative of Superman, to be honest, so I'm going to call it good writing, kind of comes off like an asshole sometimes because he's so ingrained in like a type of morality that is wrapped around, I don't know, let's call it lawful good. Where he somebody needs to steal to feed their family, and Clark will just be like, you don't steal. Why are you doing that? I have no sympathy for you, And it's not that straightforward. That's a made-up example, but you see his character flaw is basically like almost an inability to see things from someone else's point of view if he thinks an injustice has been performed, which I think is a great example of that. Yeah, exactly. And that's the way the news goes. You can email this podcast. Hey, Shawn, what's the email address?
It is podcast@ghostfiregaming.com.
I thought I'd get you. I thought everybody was like,
sending a message too, and I even knew it.
Yeah, well done. I thought you were all like, he's already asked James. I can relax now. Email that email address. I will take those emails. I will read them. Next episode's going to be a bit of a mailbag on the Eldritch Lorecast, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Twitch on a Monday, Tuesday, 9 a.m. Australian Time. Likes, stars, all those things help us get out to more listeners. I've been Ben Byrne here with James Hake, Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, and we will catch you all again next week. Have a good week. Yep. I hope it's fun. Play lots of tabletop games and
enjoy the conventions.
Oh, enjoy! Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Although, yeah. Get me out of here.
Babada yada yada yada.
We're getting too comfortable around here.
Yeah,
we need
to get
discipline.
better at that.
I think we should say that more.
My flaw is bailing and relying on the Bubbatas to save me.
Yeah.